there's core values and there's a set of principles that frame what the IAP2 approach to public participation is. And really the core principle is around the idea that communities or anyone, any member of the public, any person who could be potentially impacted by a project has, or even have an interest in a project, has the right to have a say on that project. It's not necessarily asking for community to approve projects, and we're actually really careful with any project not to set that as an objective. We can't pretend to try to get 100% approval on a project from community. But the purpose is always about making sure that the right information is delivered, that there's opportunity for people to put forward their ideas and their input. There's some really exciting stuff happening in co-design, particularly with Aboriginal communities around this principle. So, particularly around cultural centres or pieces of infrastructure, we can achieve much more beautiful outcomes if we actually ask communities, particularly Aboriginal communities, for their ideas on what should be represented there. It might just be some ideas around landscaping or public art, but there's some really beautiful things that can happen when we involve Aboriginal communities, particularly in the design of things. And there's a lot of great work happening particularly in the landscape architecture space around that idea. And sometimes it might be a piece of something as simple as an underpass or a piece of public infrastructure near a school. And how much better is it? How much more do communities feel attached to something like that if you've maybe asked the local school to come down and do some artwork there or put some ideas into the street furniture? And so they're the kinds of opportunities that can be really good fun. Yeah.
According to this figure that comes from the International Association of Public Participation, public participation is actually best understood as a continuum. So in this continuum, there's different levels of interaction between governments and the public, ranging from informing to listening at the one end, to engaging in problem solving and developing agreements between the agency and the public. So that is implementing jointly agreed solutions at the other end. So, and in between all of this continuum, there might be dialogue, debate, and an analysis. So again, there might be different ways that you engage the public. Sometimes it's going to be less engaged, and sometimes it's going to be more engaged, in where you might need to build consensus, come up to agreements. So what I'm trying to say is that public participation, it's kind of variegated, and it really depends on the context and what are the goals that you have for any given project. Something that James talks about in this chapter is that public participation is often confused with public relations, which is the practice of deliberately managing the release and spread of information between an organization and the public. So public relations is a one-way communication, right? Because it's about maintaining the image of the city or the image of this nonprofit organization, and they are seeking approval from the public for that project that they have or what they want to do. Maybe it's a plan. So this is why the author says that public relations of public information campaigns, as he actually labels the public relations, so public information campaigns, they are really an integral part of the paternalistic decide, announce, and defend. So in the past and historically, actually planning operated more in this way, in the way that they will decide what they want to do, they will tell the public what they're going to do, and then if people fight, they will defend what their decisions were. So public participation and the embracement of public participation in urban planning is something that has taken a lot of time, and it has changed, and it continues to change. And I wanted to go a little bit here into sideways. I just find like this like pretty interesting, which is the idea that that the term public relations is actually a new term, but the previous term that was like used and widely accepted by everyone was propaganda. So if you actually use the word propaganda decades ago, it was like completely acceptable. Edward Bernays was an Austrian-American pioneer in the field of public relations and propaganda. And Bernays popularized the news conferences, the press releases, in where, for example, a politician will go out and talk about what the city is doing. Maybe non-profit organization does this, does a press release of like things that they would like to see, maybe demands. Maybe they invite some politicians as well to join them in the endeavor in terms of like show support. They will have like photo opportunities, and then Edward Bernays like put it in a positive light, but actually like people use this in negative ways. And just to, as you might know, in terms of like propaganda, the Nazi Party used propaganda in order to manufacture consent from people. And Noam Chomsky, who is of Jewish descent, so he actually wrote a book in 1988 titled Manufacturing Consent, and it's talking about public relations in particular. So Chomsky says that in democratic societies, you cannot really force people to do things, like in the United States, right? So Chomsky talks or says that in democratic societies, you actually to go a different way. So you cannot use hard power. It's not very effective. And by hard power, I mean like using the military for people to submit to your wishes if you are the state. But that's not effective, and you need to use or a lot of like organizations or groups might use like soft power. So he talks about indoctrination and how it is used by the elite, by academics, by politicians, corporations, and just the mass media to control what people think. So the systems that work, and in the case of Noam Chomsky, he's talking specifically about consumerism. Noam Chomsky, as I said, he's like Jewish, so he was like deeply radicalized by the Nazi Germany propaganda machine. And there's a very good documentary in YouTube that you can watch, and it's also titled like the book, Manufacturing Consent. I just find it very interesting, and this is more like a sideways kind of conversation, but I just like wanted to include it in this lecture. So the author of the book, James Creighton, he doesn't problematize public relations in this way, but he doesn't see it either as participation, as I said before. So to go back to the title of this lecture, which is defining what public participation is and what is not, Creighton will say that public relations and public information, just giving public information, right, is not participation. It is one-way communication. It's not a two-way communication. So just giving information of the public is not public participation. Still, he doesn't just throw the concept away. So he says that public relations and public information are an essential component of an effective public participation program. And this is because it's important to first inform the public, and once they are informed, they are better to be able to participate. And even after you make decisions, you have to also inform the public so they know what decision was made. And later on, there's like a chapter that is about dealing with media, and as a planner, you will have to talk to the media. The media will want to contact you and ask you about specific projects, and you have to be able to communicate with them if they make you a request. But many times you want to be proactive, so you are the ones like initiating, as like Craig will talk about, a public information campaign for your particular project. And in your particular project, you will also be thinking about branding, it's just like slogans that you use, pictures, and all that. Like someone in public relations might think about what they're trying to communicate to the public. Creighton also discusses what he calls procedural public participation, or even checklist public participation. And here it's like the public hearings are part of this like procedural public participation. Like you have to have a public hearing if it meets X or Y criteria. For example, if you have an application and it follows like all the rules, maybe you can do that as a staff. But if they want some exception, then it will go to the public hearing, and that's more like procedural participation. So it's like he calls it checklist public participation, because basically you do A, B, and C, and then you go through these like motions. But many times the public is there. You will listen, but there's not that much change that can be made, because many of these decisions are administrative decisions. So it means that there's already some rules and regulations of like what will be approved. So it's like very the public hearing, it may be for some new information, but usually there's not new information being presented. By new information, let's say like, all the planning staff, they miss that there was like a cemetery underneath here, and that that's a very important part of our heritage, and all of a sudden that project cannot be built, right? But most times it's things like, I don't like the traffic. Did you do a traffic study? And the planning director says, yes, we did, and there was like no issues there. People are like, the property values are going down, and the planning staff will say, well, we cannot really prove that will be the case. There's no studies that actually like said that this is related, so they will listen, but again, that will not really like change the outcome of a public hearing. So some again examples of the type of participation which is procedural is like public hearings at which the public can comment on proposed actions and increase the access to information by issuing reports. So the author gives an example about environmental impact statements. So if you're building something and you might require to do like an environmental impact statement just to make sure, for example, that there's not endangered salamanders in that specific site.